I could call the meeting to order, please. We'll start off, and certainly from all of us, we'd like to welcome the Minister, and thank you very much for appearing. You look rather lonely sitting there by yourself, but what the heck. Anyway, we welcome your opening statements, and I'll remind members that we will stick very closely to our time. A lot of you have indicated that you do have questions, so I will use my little gray box here more effectively. But if we could ask the Minister, please, to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here today to discuss a number of environmental issues, including our new government's commitment to protecting the health of Canadians and their environment. I'd like first to begin my presentation today, as I'd indicated last week, discussing the report of the Commissioner of the Environment. I
would like to thank the Commissioner for her report and her recommendations, which she released last week. This report is very timely, as it comes at a critical juncture for Canada.
Commissioner for her report, and our government accepts all of her recommendations. We are now at a crossroads in terms of the protection of our health and environment of Canadians. We are also at a crossroads when it comes to environmental protection and enforcement, which have long been talked about but not acted upon. As everyone knows, the Commissioner's report demonstrates that to tackle climate change, neither advertising campaigns nor preening on the international stage can substitute for strong domestic action. What Canadians got from the old government was a lot of talk, but few results. Fortunately, Canadians have elected a new government, and what they are getting from us and will continue to get from us is action. The Commissioner commented in her report that she was troubled over the previous government's long-standing failure to make progress on the issue of climate change. The Commissioner clearly stated that there was a lack of credibility, a lack of monitoring, and a lack of reporting in the previous government's plans. The most disturbing thing, however, is that after spending over $1 billion, there were still no results on the environment.
Last week, I think some were surprised to hear the harsh truth from the Commissioner that due to Liberal inaction, Canada is not on track to meet its obligations under the Kyoto Protocol.
Appointed Minister of the Environment, I was, with great honour, also appointed by the Prime Minister to become the President of the COP to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. I made a very early decision, albeit a very difficult one, to inform our international partners in the Kyoto Protocol and subsequently inform the Canadian people what the Environment Commissioner conveyed to Canadians last week, which was that Canada was not on track to meet our Kyoto commitments. I was honest. It was a difficult message to deliver to Canadians, and we told Canadians, though, that this was something that we needed to address. I said very clearly at that time that it is impossible for Canada to reach its Kyoto targets. As the Environment Commissioner stated, we need new targets. This does not mean an abandonment of Kyoto. In fact, Canada works very closely within the Kyoto process and the Kyoto Protocol with our international partners to move forward to look beyond what the next stage of Kyoto will be beyond 2012. However, the Commissioner confirmed, as you know, what we already knew and what I stated early on in the spring. On Tuesday, when the Commissioner appeared before this committee, she said, and I quote, "It has become more and more obvious that Canada cannot meet its Kyoto Protocol commitments to reduce greenhouse gases. In fact, instead of decreasing, greenhouse gas emissions in Canada have increased by 27% since 1990, end quote. In addition, she also has concerns about the arbitrary target that was set by the previous government. Let me quote again from what the Commissioner said on Tuesday. Quote, "When we looked at where the 6% below 1990 came from, it was obvious that there was no sound analysis to support that. The federal government picked that number based on what the United States was going to go for. That's clear. There's no doubt about it." End quote. It also appears that about as much thinking went into the target as went into the expensive programs that the previous government developed to help Canada meet that target. Setting a target that was unachievable set in motion, I believe strongly, a set of subsequent bad policy decisions to actually try and reach the target. It's time for a brand new approach to the environment. This new approach is going to address the real priorities of Canadians in a tangible and accountable way. Our approach will deliver clean air to Canadians to protect their health, while also making genuine progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as other contaminants that are harmful to our health. I'm looking forward to announcing very soon a real, responsible approach that actually delivers a healthy environment for all of us. I know Canadians want to see progress on the environment. Canadians understand full well the challenges that face us. They do not expect answers overnight, but they expect action, and they expect progress. As Commissioner Jelena has recommended, a new approach is needed, based on leadership, accountability, and measurable results, and we agree with all of her recommendations. These are the key dimensions of our approach, and that is why we will succeed where the previous governments have failed. The Commissioner also identified a number of areas that we need to focus on, and our government is already taking those into consideration and taking action. In the area of leadership, environment is a government-wide priority led by our Prime Minister. As the Minister of the Environment, I am in the lead on all issues related to the environment, whether it's climate change, whether it's clean water, clean air and air pollution. I am working also, though, with a strong commitment from a number of my Cabinet colleagues around the Cabinet table, including the Ministers of Health, Natural Resources, Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities, Industry, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development as we move forward with our environment agenda. Commissioner Jelena has also pointed out the need to take into consideration energy and climate change. As she pointed out, the previous government had difficulty working between the two departments of Natural Resources and Environment. I can tell you those days are over. Energy and climate change must be dealt with together because they are linked. It's important that all sectors are involved in addressing this issue facing us, particularly the energy sector, and we will continue to consult and collaborate with all economic sectors moving forward. She also talked about the need to reduce greenhouse gases, and our approach will see reductions, not only in air pollution, but also in greenhouse gases. Throughout her report, Commissioner Jelena has pointed out the importance of the transportation sector and industry sectors to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. She noted that the previous government failed in this respect, and by contrast, our government is committed to succeeding by bringing forward legislation. Specifically, I was encouraged to see that the Commissioner saw the inadequacy of the previous government's approach, which relied on unaccountable voluntary measures. She also highlighted the need to address adaptation. I was privileged to host the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference on Adaptation in my own hometown in Edmonton. We need a realistic and effective plan to reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, but it must also include appropriate policies, strategies, and measures to build upon Canadians' capacities to actually adapt to what already is a changing climate. Environment Canada is in a position to lead and collaborate with others in scientific, technical, and socio-economic impacts. On governance and accountability is another issue that the Commissioner placed a high priority on. The committee members know full well that accountability is also of paramount importance to our government. Canadians demand accountability on all files of the government, and especially on the environment, and we will deliver. Accountability on the environment consists of having clear goals, being able to measure progress, and transparently reporting on your results to Canadians. On monitoring, Canada doesn't currently have a systematic way of measuring air quality, and the previous government did not make use of leading technology that could measure the pollution released into the environment in real time. The previous government also didn't develop a systematic way to link environmental performance in Canada with the impacts on human health, especially with respect to air pollution. This is why our air is in poor condition and why our health is suffering. This is unacceptable to Canadians, and it's unacceptable to our government. On reporting, In the past, Canadians have not been provided with clear, comprehensive information on environmental performance. This is simply unacceptable. Through clear reporting, our government will be able to show real progress to Canadians. On enforcement, accountability also means when the rules are broken, polluters are held accountable. For years, prosecutions of violations were rare under the previous government. In the isolated cases of conviction, the penalties were weak and often inconsequential. Cases were frequently settled for absurdly low amounts of money. For too long, federal prosecutors gave the environment too low a profile and made it too low a priority. Enforcement only consisted of issuing warnings rather than taking action. All Canadians agree that this is unacceptable, and it's unacceptable to our government. While the Commissioner's report highlighted a number of key issues and recommendations moving forward, I also want to address a number of other issues that are of importance to Canadians. Canadians are concerned about growing rates of asthma and are concerned about cancer from environmental sources. The Commissioner's report focused on climate change, and our government is addressing that issue. However, in addition to the previous government's lack of action on climate change, another troubling aspect was the lack of political will to address air quality, which is the #1 environmental concern of Canadians. That is why my main priority is to protect the health of Canadians. And Canadians do have reason to be concerned. We all know someone who suffers from the effects of air pollution. It's an issue that has touched every family in Canada. The Lung Association has confirmed that air pollution has a significant impact on health. It irritates, inflames, and destroys lung tissue and weakens the lungs' defenses against contaminants. Even low levels of air pollution can cause health problems. In the Lung Association's National Report Card on Pulmonary Disease, which includes chronic bronchitis and emphysema, the association stated that pulmonary disease is not only caused by smoking, but also by exposure to outdoor air pollution. Smog and poor air quality continue to cause thousands of deaths each year and hundreds of thousands of severe episodes of asthma and bronchitis, particularly among children and the elderly. During an average year, exposure to air pollution results in an estimated 60,000 emergency room visits and 17,000 hospital admissions in Ontario alone. Air pollution is now a factor in 1 out of every 12 deaths in Canada. Poor air quality also remains one of the most serious threats to biodiversity, forests, and freshwater ecosystems. We know that direct and indirect costs of air pollution on health and the environment are in the billions of dollars. A recent study by the Ontario Medical Association estimated damages in Ontario alone at $374 million in lost productivity and work time, $507 million in direct health care costs, $537 million in pain and suffering due to non-fatal illness, and $6.4 billion in economic loss due to premature death. This total in Ontario alone is expected to increase to over $11 billion by 2026. These are all very compelling reasons for us to take action to reduce air emissions and make our air cleaner. A report issued in August by the David Suzuki Foundation called The Air We Breathe stated the following, and I quote, "There is strong evidence that air pollution is the most harmful environmental problem in Canada in terms of human health effects, causing thousands of deaths, millions of illnesses, billions of dollars in healthcare expenses, and tens of billions of dollars in lost productivity every year," end quote. That is why our government is taking a strong stance on removing the pollutants from our air by introducing national legislation. Unfortunately, in the past decade, Canada's performance on the environment has lagged behind that of our international counterparts. The Sustainable Planning Research Group at Simon Fraser University completed a study in 2004 using data from the OECD. The study examined 29 key environmental indicators, and Canada's environmental performance ranked an embarrassing 28 out of 30 countries. In the same study, the United States performed better than us in a number of areas, including the emissions of sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, and carbon monoxide. Canada's performance on greenhouse gas emissions since 1990 has also lagged behind that of the United States in terms of percentage increase in greenhouse gas emissions. We are all committed to doing better on all of these fronts. That is why this will be the first time that the federal government will put in place a broad national framework to achieve real reductions in air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. In the past, the government has relied on a patchwork approach, and this was a major failure. The previous government's strategy of throwing money at the problem and voluntary agreements simply did not work. Canada's new government has promised a cleaner and a healthier environment, and we will deliver strong legislation and a real action plan that achieves results and measurable reductions in air pollution and greenhouse gases. Air quality is a national concern in Canada, and air knows no boundaries. Therefore, we need national legislation, we need national objectives, and we need national standards. We have a mandate from Canadians to act, and that's what we will continue to do, but we've already begun to deliver on a number of these areas. As you know, and the Environment Commissioner pointed out in her report, transportation is one of the leading causes of pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. Our new government has invested $1.3 billion in public transit and infrastructure. This funding will assist in the building of the infrastructure necessary to deal with the increased ridership. Starting July 1st of this year, our government provided a transit rider tax credit. This means transit riders who buy monthly passes will receive almost 2 free months of transit per year. For example, the credit could be worth as much as $635 a year for a commuter in Barrie that might travel to work in downtown Toronto. Renewable energy has great potential for providing clean alternatives for power. This government is also helping Canadians make cleaner fuel choices by increasing the average renewable fuel content in gasoline and diesel fuels by 5% by 2010. This target is more stringent than the United States, and it's on par with our European partners. Increasing the renewable energy content of fuels can help us achieve numerous objectives. From the standpoint of environmental conservation, 5% renewable content in engine fuels will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These actions alone, the transit rider tax credit, the transit infrastructure, and the 5% renewable content, all have tangible results that Canadians can see. They will promote increased public transit usage, which will help reduce congestion in our urban areas and reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. These actions will be equivalent to taking 1.5 million cars off the road year after year. According to the Canadian Renewable Fuels Association, there will be a 4.2 megaton per year reduction in net greenhouse gas emissions. There will also be 10,000 direct and indirect jobs created and $600 million of annual economic activity added to the Canadian economy when the ethanol and biodiesel production facilities are up and running. On toxics, Canadians are increasingly concerned about their exposure to toxic substances, including the low-dose chemicals in their food and the pharmaceuticals in their water. Our government has already taken significant steps to protect the health of Canadians by taking action on a number of toxic substances. We have taken action to regulate 2 harmful substances used in the production of some commonly used stain repellents and fire retardants, known as PFOSs and PBDs. We have introduced a measure to reduce the amount of mercury in Canada's atmosphere by 10 tons over the next 10 years by removing mercury switches from scrap cars before they are recycled. As all of you know, mercury is a highly toxic substance that can cause serious human health and ecological effects. In addition, Canada is the first country in the world to publish an action plan addressing certain toxic chemicals found to be sources of what's known as PFCAs. Such substances are commonly used as water and grease repellents for materials found in our homes, such as paper, fabric, leather, and carpets. As many of you know, the Conservative Mulroney government took action in 1985 to begin removing PCBs from the environment. Our new government has set in place a regulatory plan that will remove 50% of the PCBs still in use and 100% of the PCBs that are currently in storage. Many of these substances that we have taken early action on are linked to cancer, blindness, and birth defects, to name just a few of the health effects. It's clear that our government is committed to taking concrete action on toxic substances, and this is only the beginning. On September 14th of this year, we became the first government and the first country in the world to complete a full review to assess the risks to human health posed by all 23,000 chemical substances in use or produced prior to 1994. This is a significant milestone to protect the health of Canadians. In the very near future, our government will be releasing a comprehensive action plan to build on this tremendous achievement and take further action to protect the health of Canadians against toxic, cancer-causing chemicals. Earlier this month, the Canadian Cancer Society applauded our government's action on this important issue, saying, quote, "We welcome this action. We believe that Canadians should not be exposed to cancer-causing substances in the environment, and it was heartening to see so many groups come together on this important review, and we hope that this collaboration continues." End quote. In conclusion, clearly it's time for action. We have already begun demonstrating to Canadians that we take this issue very seriously. Our new government is making progress on improving the environment in which Canadians live, work, and play. And we will continue to show progress to Canadians in tangible ways that they can see. We've lagged behind our international counterparts for too long, and that has to change, and it will change. The most important way that we can make a contribution to these important international challenges is by putting in place a strong domestic agenda here in Canada. Finally, before I open up to questions, I would just like to thank each of you for being here today, and also for the hard work I know that the committee is doing on the CEPA review. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a very important piece of environmental legislation for Canadians, and I want to thank you. I've heard from my Parliamentary Secretary, Mark Warawa, all of the good work that you've been doing on the CEPA review, and all the work you've been doing in scoping the issues for consideration, and I appreciate all your cooperation on that and look forward to your questions.
Good. Thank you very much. I would remind members, if you could keep your time when we say time, if we could just stick with that so that everybody has an opportunity to ask questions. We'll begin with Mr. Godfrey.
Welcome, Minister, and I want to spend my time talking about Kyoto and global warming, and I just want to make sure that when I use the word Kyoto, you and I mean the same thing. I assume that we mean an international treaty designed to reduce greenhouse gases, whereby various countries like Canada make commitments to specific targets over time. Is that what we would mean by Kyoto?
Mr. Godfrey, there is only one Kyoto Protocol that Canada is a party to.
Okay. So I was fascinated the other day in response to a question in the House when you said that we, and your new plan, or as I gather it's now called as of today, your new approach, would go beyond Kyoto, since we now know that one plain language reading of that would mean that we would not only meet our targets, but go beyond them. Is that what you meant?
Well, Mr. Godfrey, it's very important to our international partners that we start to think about what we're going to do beyond 2012. The issue of the target that your party set, that set in motion a subsequent series of very bad policy decisions that basically has brought us to the position we are in today, in a spot where we are now in a situation working with our international partners to find a way to contribute to the Kyoto Protocol. And as I said, the most important thing that we can do as a government and as a country to contribute to this important international challenge is to put in place a strong domestic agenda, which many of our international partners have done. When we talk about going beyond Kyoto, we talk about also addressing issues like air quality and air pollution. As you know, Kyoto deals with a number of precursors to smog and deals with greenhouse gases, but we also need to deal with air pollution.
But
we
Kyoto
need a
is
national
not.
framework that deals with both of those issues.
But Kyoto is not about air pollution. We agreed that it's about the reduction of greenhouse gases. Let me then ask you, because you answered another question this week when somebody said, was talking about international credits, and I want to tell you, by the way, remind you what the Commissioner for the Environment said about this on page 32 of Chapter 1. Investing in Kyoto credits from international projects can have economic and environmental benefits. Project-based Kyoto mechanisms such as the Clean Development Mechanism and joint implementation can result in real emission reductions and provide opportunities for sustainable development in developed and developing countries. When you were asked about that, you said, well, money that we could be spending on those credits could go instead to garbage plants and water treatment plants. How would we meet our Kyoto targets, which we agree is about reducing greenhouse gases more effectively, by investing in a water treatment plant than in the international credit system, which the Commissioner for the Environment thinks is an effective way of reducing greenhouse gases? Why is that domestic choice going to be better in our fight against climate change?
Well, Mr. Godfrey, as you know, the Clean Development Mechanism is one process by which a country can use to meet its target under the Kyoto Protocol. But remember that most countries that have a target that is achievable and is realistic, and as the Environment Commissioner pointed out, the target set by your party was an arbitrarily set target. What has set in motion is having an unachievable target has led, and not having a domestic plan in place, has led your government, and now the situation we're in, to the point where the only option was to buy international credits. Most industry sectors will tell you that the government was forced into a situation whereby billions of dollars would have to be purchased through the Clean Development Mechanism in third world countries to be able to reach that target. Most industry sectors will tell you they will happily come to the table and make changes in their own technology based on best available technology, but your target basically put a restriction on them to be able to meet what was technologically available to them and force them to invest money into the Clean Development Mechanism by purchasing international credits. And I would also point out to you that there is a lot of evidence now about the lack of accountability around these kinds of projects. So while your government was investing money in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and all of those places, and I could list 100 projects where taxpayer money was involved, I'll tell you what a clean development expert said at the Institute for Policy Studies. He said because of the lack of accountability around these kinds of projects, which, by the way, involve firms that are being paid for the project participants. The project participants themselves are developers for the projects and also their own inspectors. He said, quote, "You're creating all kinds of incentives for corruption. You're giving a negative response." In India, the Center for Science and the Environment uncovered half a dozen breaches of Kyoto rules requiring developers to consult with local communities on accountability for these projects.
I'd like to move on, if I might, to...
Let me just tell you what he said. The director in India
that thought.
that deals with the Clean Development Mechanisms himself said, quote, "We were really disgusted because of the lack of accountability and the use of private accounting firms and inspection firms to make sure that these projects were actually delivering real reductions."
Now, I'd like to move to the subject of targets. You say we couldn't meet our target. The Commissioner for the Environment said two things. One is that if you can't meet that target, you should set another target. And she also said that we need short-term targets as well as long-term targets, and that would be a measure of the success of any future plan or approach. So what I want to know is, when we asked her what a short-term target was, she said, well, for example, a Kyoto target of 2010, 2012. So I guess my question would be, will Canada have regulated greenhouse gas targets in effect by January the 1st of 2008?
Canada will have, for the first time, a national regulatory framework to deal with air pollutants and greenhouse gases that will clearly involve and must involve short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets. But what I will tell you is that this government will not set arbitrary targets without consultation with industry, provinces, and territories, which was what led your government to leave us in the position we are today. We will consult with industry, particularly in provinces and territories, on short and medium-term targets.
Since you want to move from talking to taking action, and since it would take about 5 years to pass a Clean Air Act and bring in the requisite regulations, And since we have a mechanism which everybody agrees, including the Commissioner, when we put it to her here on Tuesday, called the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which is ready to go, both on dealing with pollution and on dealing with the regulation of greenhouse gases, why would we need a new piece of legislation, a Clean Air Act, if we want to take action now? What is to prevent us from using SEPA to get on with it right now, and won't bringing in a new piece of legislation which is unnecessary in the view of the Commissioner for the Environment slow down things unnecessarily?
Canada's Clean Air Act will establish a regulatory framework for the first time to deal with both air pollution and greenhouse gases from the federal level. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a very strong and important piece of legislation in Canada, but what I will say to you is that it could be stronger. There are elements about the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that need improvement, particularly around the area of monitoring and reporting and enforcement.
Why would we not just simply use the review process then for SEPA to bring about those improvements and do it possibly through regulation? We know that we have everything in place. All the powers are there, says the Commissioner, so we don't need a new piece of legislation. We just need to make the current one, which we're reviewing right now, do the job through regulation.
As I said, Canada's Clean Air Act will set in place the powers that the federal government will need to act on air pollution and greenhouse gases from a federal level. It will also give us increased powers on reporting, enforcement, auditing, and monitoring, which is key to making sure that we can show progress to Canadians on this important issue.
If through testimony before this committee it turns out that in fact all the powers you describe are contained within SEPA, would you still insist on going ahead with the Clean Air Act?
As I said, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a very important piece of legislation, but Canada's Clean Air Act will enhance our powers at the federal level to deal with air pollutants and greenhouse gases, particularly in the area of auditing and monitoring and reporting and enforcement to Canadians.
If the committee could prove, however, that everything you want could be achieved through SEPA reform rather than a new Clean Air Act, would you accept that instead, if you're anxious to get on with action rather than talking?
As I said, when the Canadian Clean Air Act is tabled, I look forward to working with this committee on amendments to make it stronger. I think you will be very pleased with what you see. And we look forward to having your participation. The environment is an issue that matters to all Canadians, and I hope that this committee will put aside its partisanship and recognize that for the first time in a long time, you will have a piece of legislation in front of you that will provide you with the opportunity to show Canadians your commitment not only on air quality, but on the issue of climate change.
Okay. A facile question, because I'm getting the evil eye from the chairman here. Will your government allow emissions trading for greenhouse gases?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Will your government allow emissions trading for greenhouse gases in your new approach/plan?
What I will tell you is how our government differs from the Liberal government on this issue. We will not use taxpayer money to play the emissions trading market, nor will we use taxpayer money to create an artificial market to buy and sell credits. I believe, and as you know, the emissions trading market is relatively new. The European Union market crashed not only a few months ago, and hundreds of millions of euros were lost in taxpayer money in European governments. So what I will reiterate to you is that our government will not take those kinds of risks with taxpayers' money. We will not use taxpayer money to trade credits, to buy credits, or to set up an artificial market for credit trading.
Mr. McGrath.
Mr. Bikra. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before starting with my first question, Minister, today I would like to table a petition signed by more than 80,000 people from Quebec and Canada who wish to see that the Kyoto Protocol be complied with. Minister, we had to do this today because it seems to me that since you were appointed as Minister of the Environment, you have not been listening to parliamentarians since the beginning of May, since the motion that was passed by the House of Commons, but also to Canadians who want to see the Kyoto Protocol complied with. Now, today you've told us about new goals, a new approach, but nothing you have said has convinced us that it is your intention to comply with the Kyoto Protocol. Therefore, my question is this. Do you realize that what your attitude means is that you're not only losing the trust of the House of Commons, but also that of the population of Canada and Quebec?
Or comment, and thank you for this, the petition that you brought before me. This petition is of no surprise to me. I know full well the commitment that Canadians have to the issue of climate change. I also know the full commitment they have to seeing the improvement of air quality. As you know, air quality is the #1 environmental concern to Canadians, and it's also a concern to Quebecers. What I will say to you is our government has never stated that we would abandon Kyoto, never stated that we will not participate in the Kyoto Protocol process. What we have stated is that we need new targets. The Environment Commissioner stated that very clearly last week. So what I would say to you is that I encourage you to work with us moving forward. The best way, as I said before, the best way for our government and our country to show a commitment to the Kyoto Protocol is to put a good domestic plan in place with all of the provinces, a national domestic agenda to reduce greenhouse gases and air pollution. And that is what we will be bringing forward for this committee to examine and bringing forward to this committee to comment on and hopefully to improve upon.
Je comprends que vous nous dites que ça nous prend des nouveaux.
I understand what you mean when you say we need to set new targets. You even said that you expect to go beyond the Kyoto Protocol. Now, does that mean that Canada could potentially ask the international community to delay its commitment of going 6%, of decreasing its emissions by 6%, and putting it off until the second period, the second phase? So does that mean that you'll be complying with the Kyoto Protocol, but only by 2025, as opposed to the earlier dates? Is that what it means?
I understand your question, but the Kyoto Protocol has very, very strict mechanisms in place for compliance. Very early on, as I said, not only was albeit a difficult decision, to inform the Canadian public that we were not on track. We weren't not only on track, we were off the rails in terms of reaching our Kyoto target. But I also sat down with the United Nations Secretariat. I sat down with our international partners in advance to let them know where Canada was at, but to also tell them that we are fully committed to working with them in this process, and then what we will do to show action and progress to our international counterparts, to the Kyoto Protocol members, and to Canadians. We will be putting in place a domestic agenda in short order to show progress. That is what, as you well know, there are many countries around the world that are involved in the Conference of Parties subject to the Kyoto Protocol that are not reaching their targets. The Kyoto Protocol was the first big international step. We are also involved in the G8 discussions, the G8+5 discussions on climate change. Our chair, Bob Mills, just came back late last night. He was kind enough with all his expertise, and I value him so much for that, for being at the G8 discussions, because I was unable to be there. We're also involved in discussions on the Asia-Pacific Partnership. There are a number of regional groups emerging in the eastern United States. California has just introduced a piece of domestic legislation to address greenhouse gases. This is an issue of global importance, and Canada is participating on a number of fronts. But what we have said to our international counterparts is that we will, in short order, put in place a domestic agenda to contribute to that international challenge. Again, that is the best way that we can help reach the goals that the international community has set for us.
Je comprends bien, Madame la Ministre.
From what I understand, Minister, you expect to be reminding the international community that Canada wants to tackle climate change. But with all due respect to our chairman, I think maybe it would have been better if had been present at that meeting rather than send our chairman. I think that if all the ministers of the international community were there, you should have been there. And I think your absence is unacceptable. Now, you have talked about a domestic plan. The Commissioner Environment was clear on page 30 of Chapter 1 on climate change. She said that there are advantages related to credits trading. Yesterday, in Montreal, there was someone who was encouraged by your statements because you said you spoke about a credits trading system in Canada. Can you state today in the committee that your government intends to establish a credits trading market within our borders? I don't want you to talk about hot air. I don't want you to talk about purchasing international credits. I want to know whether it is your government's intention to establish a credits trading market in Canada.
Question. As you well know, credit exchange markets do not need the government's permission to emerge. There is not a national regulatory framework for greenhouse gas emission reductions in the United States, and we have the Chicago Climate Exchange that is operating. I've met with the Montreal Climate Exchange proponents, and what I will say is that there is a number of compliance mechanisms that we can look at as a government, and I look forward to discussing all of those with this committee in ways that we can help industry achieve reductions. As you know, there is only a certain amount of in-house reductions that industry can make based on best available technology or potentially near coming available technology. But beyond that, what they look for is other compliance mechanisms. And there's a number of those that we can discuss, and when the Clean Air Act is tabled, I look forward to discussing those with you. But as I said, trading itself is one of those compliance mechanisms that's available to industry. But what I will tell you is that this government will not be a part of the trading market. We will not use taxpayer money to play the trading market. We will not put together a pool of taxpayer money of credits, which is what the last government did, to buy and sell credits or to create an inflated artificial market.
Je trouve ça un peu, je vous parle pas de la bourse de Chicago.
I'm not talking about the Chicago market. I'm very familiar with that one. I'm talking about the one that will be established, that the government has the responsibility for. I don't understand when you say that the market, when your government says that the market can work, a market can work, but then when we're dealing with the environment, the market can't work. There have been places where it has worked. There are ways of improving these types of markets and achieving them. For example, we've done it with the United States on acid rain. So do you not believe you're going down the wrong path with this? And if you refuse to establish that market, then we run the risk of not achieving compliance. And once again, we'll be postponing by about 10 years a goal that should already have been reached today.
In your question about the Montreal Climate Exchange's comments about that our government is indicating moving with legislation. That is because a regulatory framework or legislation enables the opportunity for the creation of a market, but the government does not create that market. It is then emerges around a regulatory framework. So as I said, when the Clean Air Act is tabled and comes before this committee, I look forward to looking at all of the compliance mechanisms available to industry sectors. But again, as far as the government's concerned, we will not be using taxpayers' money to play in that market. We will not take risks with taxpayers' dollar that way. The emissions trading markets are still something that's relatively new, and we've seen in the European market in particular a recent crash that caused hundreds of millions of euros in losses to taxpayer dollars and governments in Europe, and we will not embark on a risk like that with taxpayer money.
Thank you, Mr. McGraw. I just want to, for the record, correct something that you stated. At the G8+5 meeting where there were 20 countries represented, many of them were represented by bureaucrats. Few of them were represented by actually elected members of Parliament who are accountable. So you were incorrect in saying that, that all of the ministers were there. They were not. Thank you, Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thanks for showing up. Let's start with some things that we agree with. The Liberals, over the years that they were in charge of greenhouse gas emissions, were an unmitigated disaster. Is that a fair comment?
I will say what the Commissioner said.
Please.
That there has been some attempt to make progress, and I recognize that because I think it's important. Particularly the department, the Environment Department, has a strong foundation of science that can enable us to move forward quickly on a plan, a strong domestic agenda.
A for effort, not so great on the results.
As I said, I think voluntary measures, it's difficult to show results with the lack of framework that voluntary measures provide us with. Your
department agrees with all the recommendations in Ms. Jelena's report, the Commissioner's report? Indicating yes? Yeah?
Yes.
A quick question in terms of the analysis that you folks use when you're distributing. A part of her recommendations were that there wasn't much analysis made of, say, our first commitments under Kyoto. And you cite that as a serious flaw, correct?
Yes.
I'd like to know what analysis you made when your government decided to kill the ENVI program.
As you know, in the minister's or the Commissioner's report clearly indicated there was a serious concern with lack of accountability and effectiveness, and therefore results on all of the climate change programs. Our government, for that reason, canceled a number of these programs and put a number of these programs under review.
Do you believe ENVI wasn't working?
What I will say is what she said, which was there was a foundation and it was moving in the right direction. But I know that the Minister of Natural Resources is coming forward with an energy efficiency plan that he believes will be enhanced and will provide more accountability and results and effectiveness on energy efficiency and conservation matters. I think what Commissioner Jelena has very clearly pointed out is that all of these programs, including EnerGuide, can work better. And so it's the wish and I believe the strong intent of the Minister of Natural Resources who oversees this program to bring forward a more effective program.
So a program that had a strong foundation and according to Madame Jelenas, the Commissioner for the Environment, was working. Your government decided to cancel it. The question I have around greenhouse gas emissions and climate change in general, do you believe it's a serious problem?
Yes.
Do you believe humans are in fact contributing to this problem?
I think all of us contribute to this problem.
Interesting. The Prime Minister doesn't seem to. It seems that in casting doubt over the very science of climate change, by inviting skeptics like Dr. Ball and others to... Have you attended any of his sessions? No? Timothy Ball? No?
I'm not familiar with him.
A lot of your caucus members have. There's a doubt that the Prime Minister put over the very science of climate change only just last week, saying that we can't predict the weather next week. How can we possibly have any certainty over what's happening in terms of the climate over decades? That seems to me an irresponsible comment, considering the incredible amount of research that's gone into this and your own admission that this is an important and pressing problem. Why would such irresponsible comments be coming from the leadership of your government over such an important issue?
What I would say to you is what's irresponsible is that we're still having this debate and that you are still asking questions about the science of climate change.
I didn't ask those questions, Minister. That was actually the Prime Minister who posed those questions.
In our government's speech from the throne, within the first week of coming into power, one of the commitments the Prime Minister made is to show measurable improvements to our environment by reducing air pollution and greenhouse gases, and to put in place a strong domestic agenda to address both of these issues. That's commitment, and we've already shown action on both of those fronts.
We signed the Kyoto Protocol, and in that protocol we have commitments for a certain amount of reductions in pollution in Canada by 2012. Mm-hmm. You've said that we won't abandon Kyoto, yet we won't abide by Kyoto.
No, those are your words.
Oh, will we meet our targets under Kyoto?
We know that Canada is not on track, as the Commissioner very clearly stated, to meet the target under Kyoto. Does that mean we're abandoning the protocol? No. Does it mean we're participating with our international partners on this important issue? Within the protocol, also within the G8+5,
Sure.
also within the Asia-Pacific Partnership, also with our neighboring United States. There's a number of ways that we can move forward to contribute to this international challenge.
The Commissioner, when asked as to whether it was possible to meet our 2012 targets, said that yes, it was in fact possible. Your leader asked for suggestions. The New Democrats put forward suggestions. Are you planning to pick those up and actually make an attempt at meeting the 2012 targets?
I've reviewed some of the suggestions that you have made, and I encourage you, when the Clean Air Act is tabled and it comes to committee, to raise those issues again. I know you've made a number of very, very good suggestions on the environment file, and I look forward to working with you. I know that you have not spoken to me directly about these, although I've invited you many times to bring forward amendments both to SEPA that potentially we could support together, because I think it's a great opportunity this committee has right now, undergoing the review of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, to make it stronger. So I would encourage you to focus on things like ways to make the Canadian Environmental Protection Act work better, become more effective, and show stronger results for Canadians, instead of being caught up in the partisanship that you are always caught up in.
Sure. Interesting. Are you interested in emissions intensity reductions or absolute reductions when it comes to the tar sands?
Well, in terms of the energy sector, there's...
It was specific to the tar sands, though.
In terms of the energy sector, there's two issues there. There's obviously upstream oil and gas. There's the conventional oil and gas sector. There's also the oil sands sector. On pollution, there's different ways that we can measure, whether it's through intensity targets or hard targets. When it comes to pollution, hard caps are obviously something that we would consider as well. As I said, all targets, whether short, medium, and long term, will be consulted with industry and provinces and territories. Our government will not set arbitrary targets like the previous government did. It's very important that we put in place achievable targets.
Will they be absolute?
As you know,
that was a simple question, Chair. I'm a bit confused. I appreciate the briefing on the energy sector, but I asked the specific question about, will you use emissions intensity or will you use absolute targets? It's not complicated. It's a straightforward question.
As I said, when the Clean Air Act is tabled, this committee will have an opportunity to address a number of issues related to the best form to take when it comes to targets. Short, medium, and long-term targets are obviously key, but when it comes to short-term targets, those set in place the most pressing reductions of greenhouse gases for the energy sector. And it's important that we set in place reachable and achievable targets so that we're not actually forcing money out of the country. What we want to do is, first of all, ensure that any industry sectors are making investments in their own in-house technology, in-house reductions. And second to that, hopefully put in place compliance mechanisms that will see money staying within the country.
Something we all see as laudable. Are you planning to stop the $1.5 billion that Canadian taxpayers subsidize the tar sands with every year?
As I said, the oil and gas sector, as the Environment Commissioner has pointed out, has to be a key contributor to the environmental agenda. And we've had a very good first meeting with the oil and gas sector last week and met with a number of the CEOs that are obviously implicated in this environmental agenda, and indicated to them that we will be moving ahead with legislation.
Will you remove the subsidy to the oil and gas sector? That's just my point, Chair. I'm asking a very specific question, and I'm getting a general answer. Will you, your government, stop the $1.5 billion subsidy to the oil and gas sector that has been going on under the Liberals and continues under you in your plan?
As the Environment Minister, what I can tell you is that the oil and gas sector has to be a big part of our plan. We have met with them early on and indicated to them that we're moving ahead with legislation, and they will be a big part of it.
Do you believe that ethanol is a good approach in terms of putting it into fuels for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in Canada?
As you know, moving to cleaner burning fuels is a very important way that we can contribute to lowering greenhouse gas emissions. As the Environment Minister, I will tell you that there are advantages to ethanol, but obviously biodiesel, as you know, makes a better contribution to the reductions in greenhouse gases. But I think the flip side of that is also the economic opportunity, particularly for the agriculture industry, as you know, both in the production of ethanol and biodiesel.
I asked in the House yesterday, and I appreciate it was question period. It's difficult to have answers on hand. How much have we reduced our emissions from the auto sector with the 17 months of the auto agreement, the voluntary agreement?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because that's one of the concerns that I have with a voluntary agreement. It was a good first step for the former government to sign the Memorandum of Understanding with the auto sector. But
do we actually
the problem,
know?
Minister, could you just finish your thought there, please?
Sure. It's only 1 year old at this point, and the concern that I have about using a voluntary memorandum of understanding is that the memorandum of understanding itself is with the entire association, so that it precludes individual manufacturers in the auto sector from complying and reporting with specific requirements. I will say, though, that the projected emissions reductions for the voluntary MOU are very good. As I said, it's only 1 year in at this point, and there are obvious advantages to moving to a regulatory framework, particularly on the reporting and the accountability and the transparency for that sector.
Thank you. Mr. Warwa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be splitting my 10 minutes. I'll be only using 5 and then providing them with Mr. Harvey to my right. That way, permitting hopefully everybody a chance to ask the Minister a question. Minister, thank you for being here. My question of the Commissioner, and I really appreciated her report. My closing question was asking her the importance of this committee working together on this file. And she did impress the importance of each member of this committee to work together. As you said in your presentation, that we are at a crossroads. She said the same thing, and it's a very important crossroads. We have to move together, not in an adversarial role, but together. So I appreciate you being here today. I also am excited about the days ahead where we're working together. My question is your involvement with international obligations and commitments. You were just recently criticized for not being able to be in 2 places at the same time. I know how busy you are and how hard you've worked on this file. In regarding Kyoto and our obligations to Kyoto and the other obligations, could you share with the committee what you actually have been doing on the international front since you've been becoming the Minister of the Environment?
Well, thank you for the question. As I stated, it was a privilege and an honor for to be appointed by the Prime Minister to be the chair, the president of the Conference of the Parties to Kyoto. And this has been an excellent experience in terms of working with our partners, because as I indicated to you, we are not the only country that is facing challenges in meeting our greenhouse gas targets set under the Kyoto Protocol. We have a number of countries, and I believe it's around 15 countries now, that are not on track to meeting their targets. So what has come out of that as a consequence is a very strong consensus that we need to start moving forward to talk about what those challenges are, how we can face them, and what kinds of solutions that we can use to address those. Another thing that's come out of this exercise is the fact that non-Kyoto parties are interested also in starting to dialogue with us and with other countries on this issue, namely Australia and the United States. The other issue that's come out of this, of course, is that developing countries do not have any targets under Kyoto, and China and India, for instance, are considered developing countries under the Kyoto Protocol. So another part of the discussion has become, how will developing countries like China and India start to contribute to make reductions? Because, of course, the United States, China, and India are responsible for the largest percentage of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So I think the important thing that has happened is that we have begun a dialogue on the international stage that was set in motion by Canada, raising the profile of the challenge of meeting the first term target. about how we are going to address these issues moving into the second period of commitment. So it has been an excellent experience for Canada, but what has come out of it for us, obviously as a government, is the need, as other countries have, that have been successful in reaching their Kyoto commitments, is to put in place a strong domestic agenda, and that's what Canada's Clean Air Act will do.
Thank you, Minister. Early on, when you shared that we were not going to be able to meet those targets, you used the phrase that we would have to shut down every train, plane, and automobile. Just how close were we to meeting our targets, and what did you mean by that?
Well, I asked the department early on to brief me on the opportunities for us to meet our targets and what that would mean. It would mean that we would have to shut down the majority of industry in Canada to be able to make that commitment. If we made that commitment here at home, the other opportunity would be to spend billions of dollars on international credits. Our government made a decision early on that we will not send money overseas to purchase international credits because of the increasing question around the lack of accountability for those projects and the real question of whether or not they're even achieving real reductions overseas. I also asked the department to put together the economic costs of achieving our Kyoto target through regulation only, which is exactly what Bill C-288 would entail. As you know, Bill C-288 does not have any monetary or funding attached to it, so it would have to be implemented through regulatory means alone. What that would entail, just to give you an example or a specific example, that would mean that electricity prices in British Columbia would increase by 40%. And electricity prices in Ontario would increase by 65%. And natural gas prices would increase by over 300% in Alberta and over 130% in Ontario. So these are the kinds of impacts of forcing the 6% target on Canada's industry today through a regulatory framework would entail, which is exactly what Bill C-288 entails that was passed in the House last night.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Harvey.
Minister, under the Liberals, international credit purchasing was done. And I'd like you to tell us how much those purchases amounted to. How much did that cost?
The money that was spent on international credits, but there's, I have in front of me a list of at least $100 million of money that was used to purchase international credits. I can go through the list and share with you, $5 million spent into the Canada-China Consortium, $3.7 million through the State Development Planning Commission in China, $2 million to the State Power Corporation of China, $2.5 million to Can Global Management for Panama, $375,000 to Paraguay. I could go on. $5 million through the Asian Development Bank to be paid to the People's Republic, the Ministry of Science and Technology in China, $4.2 million through the World Bank to be paid to the regional areas of China, India, and other Asian countries, $2.3 million to the South Pacific, $3 million to Bangladesh, another $2 million to the State Power Corporation of China, $1.5 million to the government of India. I could go on and on. There's hundreds of millions of dollars in money purchased for international credits to be able. Some of these projects actually didn't even earn us Kyoto credits.
Terrible. Oh.
The problem with this is not only that this money was not spent here at home on the priorities of Canadians, like things, cleaning up sewage in local communities. We have over 19 municipalities in Canada that are still dumping raw sewage in the ocean. And a small sewage facility can cost as low as $2 million. So when we see this kind of list, it is troubling that the priorities of the Liberal Party was to spend this money elsewhere. With no plan in place for 13 years, 4 plans later, and no reductions in greenhouse gases, no national framework for air quality or greenhouse gases, and this was the only plan, was to buy international credits. And the troubling thing about that is the increasing question that people have, even involved in the Kyoto Protocol process with the clean development mechanism. People themselves are increasingly concerned of the lack of accountability of the transfer of funds from the Government of Canada into these project proposals, because many times private accounting and inspection firms are used to actually validate the projects that transfer the money to the third world countries, and these firms then are paid by the project participants, and the actual project participants act both as the developer of the project, and then they also act as the project verifiers at the same time. And what a CDM expert himself said, Daphne Wisham, said, who is a clean development mechanism expert, said that, quote, "You're creating all kinds of incentives for corruption and giving a negative response." Also, that this rush to try and certify emissions reductions through the clean development mechanism, particularly in India, we have the Center for Science and Environment has uncovered breaches of Kyoto rules requiring developers to consult with local communities and to make sure there's actually accountability for these projects. And his quote was, "We were really very disgusted." The concern is that these countries also have environmental priorities. And this is not the way that we're helping them meet their priorities either. So there was a lack of accountability, clearly, and a lack of priorities here in this country, but we're doing nothing to help these countries achieve their local priorities as well.
I'm sorry. We're now into the second round, and this is 5 minutes. I'd ask you to be very brief in your questions so the minister gets a chance to answer. I understand that Mr. Dion and Mr. Silva will split their 5 minutes. Or Rodriguez, I'm sorry. Mr. Dion. Or Mr. Rodriguez.
Good morning, Minister. You have a very enjoyable minister. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. You spoke about moving from talk to taking action. We would like to say on the record that everything you have said about toxic was in the book with the previous government, that the 23,000 chemicals listed has been done after years of hard work by hundreds of Canadians. I'm sure we'll not try to steal the credit for that. Okay, now, I will list you, because I have very few minutes, a list of regulations that I'm surprised that are not going through since after 8 months, or that I would like to know where they are. The first one is the 45 megatons of reductions by the large funnel emitters, reduction of 11% of their emissions. It has been listed, greenhouse gas emissions under CEPA, as you know. It was almost ready to go. Where are you? The second one is about clean air. Let's talk about clean air. Where is the Air Quality Agreement Progress Report 2006, Canada-United States, that was supposed to be published in June? Another one is the sulfur in fuel for rail locomotives, marine vessels, off-road construction, and mining equipment. It was proposed by me, announced in the speech. Where are we? The other one is the bus standards that would require a reduction of 85% from current allowable levels of emission of NOx and 95% for particulate matter levels. Another one that I would like to know where it is the ozone depletion substances, including methyl bromide. The other one is on the...
That you only have 2.5 minutes.
Yes, and I conclude the volatile organic compounds in paints, consumer products, and alkanes. And the last one is recreational vehicles. Where are these regulations? I want action. They were almost in my desk. Can you announce them?
Because you took down the government.
Oh, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your comments and questions. What I will say is that our government has made it clear through the actions we've already taken and the actions that we will continue to take that we are not afraid to act in a regulatory manner to deal with air pollutants and toxics and greenhouse gases. A number of the issues that you have raised, I have maybe not raised in my speech, but I can assure you that actions are being taken on all of those fronts. What I will say, though, is that I was encouraged to hear you say publicly about the challenge that Canada faces reaching the Kyoto target. I'm sure that that was difficult for you to say, but I think it's very important coming from you to send that signal that it's important for us to continue to work with our international partners, but also to recognize that the target that was set by your government is not achievable.
Thank you, Minister. If Mr. Rodriguez would like to finish off, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Ministre. Je suis pas certain.
Thank you, Minister. I'm not sure why you came today. You don't have a plan, no targets, no timeline. Yesterday evening you voted against Kyoto while the Prime Minister was in Toronto watching a hockey game. I guess that was more important to him than voting on the environment. So, last evening you voted against this international treaty. So I'm wondering what kind of example you're setting by doing this.
Repeatedly, the target, your legislation that you put forward last night in a very, I would say, irresponsible manner, the Environment Commissioner herself said that the target is unachievable that your government put in place. The target was within that legislation. We also know, and the Environment Commissioner stated, there was no economic, environmental, or social analysis done for that target. Your piece of legislation included that target. I have repeatedly said that this government respects the Kyoto Protocol, that we will work with our international partners to make a contribution to the Kyoto
bill that's
Protocol.
going to be coming before our committee and how people voted is not part of the issue. I think if you get on with your question, it might be helpful.
Bien. Alors, vous n'avez pas l'intention de participer à un marché des...
So it's not your intention to participate in any international credits trading, no sort of international green plan. You've cut excellent programs. So I'm wondering if you really want to do anything at all in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. What's left?
Is work with this committee on bringing forward a piece of federal legislation for the first time that is going to set the stage for a broad national framework to deal with air pollution and greenhouse gases. And I would ask you and every committee member to work with the government. You have an excellent opportunity here. As the Environment Commissioner stated, we are at a crossroads. The environment is an issue that Canadians want all of us to work together on. They want this committee and they want Parliament to show them that we want to see real progress and real results. They know that the environmental challenges Canada faces are not insurmountable, but they know that we aren't going to solve everything overnight. But what they do ask from us is to work together and to show progress. That's what our government has already started to do, and soon we will be introducing a piece of legislation that this committee will get a chance to participate in shaping as we move forward. So I invite you to be a part of that, and I ask you to bring forward any of your ideas and amendments to that piece of legislation as we work through it.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Mr. Chairman, she's come here to announce an announcement that she'll maybe be announcing. I'm sorry for the interpreters, but she's announcing something that might eventually be announced about an announcement. That's what.
Rodriguez is that I am not an environment minister about press releases and announcements. We are doing the hard work behind the scenes that Canadians expect us to do, and they expect this committee to do. So again, I ask you, when the Clean Air Act is tabled, to work with this government to show Canadians that all of us care about the environment and we're willing to put aside partisan politics to do the right thing.
Mr. Watson.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much, and perhaps a little cold water for Mr. Rodriguez. I'm going back to the transcripts from the committee with Madame Jelena. My colleague to the right of me, Mr. Velicott, asked a very simple question, and I'm going to quote, whether the government changed or not, this is back on January 23rd, whether the government changed or not, new targets are needed. Madame Jelena's reply, and I quote, that's absolutely right. Not kind of right, well, maybe, no. That's absolutely right. So even had the previous government won the last election,
and continued on in governing, Madame Jalona makes it clear that absolutely new targets are needed. Mr. Rodriguez brought forward a bill, C-288, and unfortunately it was passed, that's going to shackle us to the failed approach of Kyoto with respect to timeline, time frame, and target.
Mr. Watson,
Yes.
if again, let's stay away from the bill. It's coming before the committee. If we can just carry on with your question, please.
Well, I guess the question then to the minister is, should we be shackled to a failed Kyoto approach in terms of target and timeline? Your comments on that.
What I would simply say is that the Liberal Party, Kyoto did not fail this country. The Liberal Party of Canada failed Kyoto. That is exactly what happened and what's transpired over 13 years, 4 plans, and no results. This government will continue to work with our international partners, both within the Kyoto Protocol, in the G8+5 dialogue on climate change, and in the Asia-Pacific Partnership moving forward. It's important, though, and I've tried to make that as clear as possible, that the best way that we can make a contribution to this agenda internationally is to have a strong national framework in place. We've seen every country that has succeeded in this area put in place a very strong domestic agenda, and that is what the Clean Air Act will provide this country.
I'm thinking of an old proverb that a dog returns to its vomit, and clearly the Liberals haven't learned. I want to turn to the broader part of your speech, and that was not only greenhouse gas reduction, but the need to talk about human health and the broader environmental question. Down in Essex County, where I come from, of course, we have high miscarriage rates, high rates of respiratory ailments, high rates of cancer. And so clearly, human health effects on the broader pollution question is important. In the last Parliament, one of the things I was very frustrated with was that whether we talked about water quality, water levels, air pollution, smog, the one-word answer from the Liberal Party at the time was Kyoto. It seemed to be the panacea that was going to cure all ills. We know that's not true. Can you elaborate a little bit more on everything from land conservation, water quality, things like that? Talk about the broader environmental agenda, specifically also with respect to human health and the importance of that. I'm pleased the agenda is moving also in that direction.
In a minute and a half, please, Minister.
I would just say that we've made it very clear that the health of Canadians is what will guide our environmental agenda. I made that clear when I talked about that the #1 priority of Canadians we know is air quality, and we are concerned about the impact of air pollution on the health of Canadians. I also indicated, as you know, that we do not have proper reporting and monitoring mechanisms in Canada right now for air quality objectives, and we do not have national standards or national objectives because we do not have a national framework. This will be the first time that the federal government embarks on a comprehensive approach from a national perspective to dealing with the issue of air pollution and greenhouse gases. It is an ambitious achievement, it's an ambitious agenda, and that's why I ask all of the members of this committee, when Canada's Clean Air Act is tabled, to work with us to make sure that the proper compliance mechanisms are put in place and that we work with our counterparts around the House to show Canadians that this is a priority to all, and not only to our government, but it's a priority to all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Lucier.
Oui, Madame.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister. In the House, there are members of Parliament who often say that Canada has increased its greenhouse gas emissions by about 35%. I've often heard that. Now, in your own graph that you gave us, it says that Canada has increased these emissions by 26.6%. So how did some come up with 35%, given that you have 26 on your own graph? And how do you reconcile that with a reduction in 6%? 26 plus 6 is 32. So I'm wondering why I don't see 34.6 on your graph. Now, my question is this. Let's say that there was an increase in by 26.6%. What is the contribution of the oil sands to this? What is their contribution to that increase?
The graph that you see in front of you is actually directly from the Environment Commissioner's report. And you'll see on the right-hand side of the graph what's called the Kyoto gap. That is 34.6%. That is what's referred to when people relate to the gap that we would have to close to meet the Kyoto target. To answer your question about the oil and gas sector in particular, the oil sands, as the Environment Commissioner pointed out, the oil sands and the transportation sector make up, I believe her statistic is 78% of the greenhouse gases in Canada. So as I've said clearly, as you well know, we have met both with the automotive sector and the oil and gas sector in the last week to indicate to them our government's intention to move forward with legislation. These two particular sectors have the most opportunity to make environmental gains in this area, which is why they are key to our plan and key to making sure that we can try and close this gap moving forward.
La commissaire à l'environnement nous indique.
The Commissioner of the Environment stated that oil sand production will double by 2015 any greenhouse gas emissions. So what is your reaction to that statement on the part of the Commissioner?
Is stating something that's clearly a challenge to Canada. Canada is a net energy exporter. And so the fact that we have a high level of greenhouse gas emerging from that particular sector is a challenge for Canada, which is why, as I said, we've indicated both to the oil and gas sector and the automotive sector, which is another large contributor to the greenhouse gases in Canada, that they have to be a big part of our plan. And we'll be working with them moving forward.
Et quelles sont les mesures qu'on doit prendre?
Then what measures need to be taken?
Put in place a national framework, and that includes legislative measures. And as I said, I look forward to the Canada's First Clean Air Act coming to this committee to deal with this issue directly.
Mr. Bigra, did you want to?
Mr. Bigra.
Monsieur Bigra.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to speak. I've been listening to you and listening to what you've been saying. You're refusing to establish a credits market, a domestic credits market. You're refusing to use the development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. You're rejecting that clean development mechanism, and you're saying that it will be impossible for Canada to meet Kyoto's targets. So aren't you saying today that the role that Canada will be playing domestically and internationally, in fact, will only just shoot down the Kyoto Protocol rather than improve it? Are you saying that today?
Is that there is a number of compliance mechanisms that can help industry sectors reach goals that we set for them. The problem with the former plan was that we had an unachievable target set in place, which led to the need to use the international credit mechanism more so than putting in place a domestic agenda that would see in-house reductions by investments in technology, for example. It's important as we move ahead that we set realistic targets for our industry sectors so that we are encouraging the maximum investment in best available technology here in Canada. That is what our government will obviously be focused on. We want to keep money here at home. We don't want to send money overseas. Industry and communities across this country need support to reach these kinds of objectives. Compliance mechanisms obviously can help with that. When it comes to a market, I've clearly indicated that our government does differ from the Liberal government of the past. We will not create a pool of credits paid for with taxpayer money and use that to create an artificial market, nor will we use taxpayer money to buy international credits or fund international credit projects.
Mr. Vellacott.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a kind of a preparatory note in reference to comments that Mr. Dion made just moments ago, Mr. Ambrose, he is a former Environment Minister, knowing the files fairly well. He was honest enough to acknowledge that the Liberal Kyoto targets cannot be met. And to his credit, he was also consistent. He was honest enough not to show up and support unachievable Kyoto targets last night in the vote. He did not support or vote for Mr. Rodriguez's bill. And I think that's important because he had his hands in the files. He would be well aware of that and appreciate the consistency there.
Mr. Vellacott,
I want to segue right on
stay
from
away
there.
from the voting, please.
I want to segue right on from there, Mr. Chairman, to because you have acted in a number of ways, and I'm a practical kind of person, as I think most Canadians are, and you have been out and about in some very realistic ways, I think, moving to get some achievable things done for the Canadian public. And so I'd like if you could kind of elaborate, refresh our memory in terms of some of the action that you've taken so far on the environment since you have assumed the role in this very short period of time as the Minister for the Environment.
Thank you for your question. Our government has obviously already acted in very tangible ways, which we've made that commitment to Canadians to show progress and to show tangible results in things like investments in public transit, also in the investment in transit rider tax credit, which is important to make sure that we get Canadians out of their cars and into cleaner transportation, and a commitment to cleaner fuels with setting Canada's first target and also convening the first ever historic meeting of ministers responsible for renewable fuels in Canada to set in place a national framework to encourage renewable fuel strategy. So there's a number of things that we've already done. We've shown action that's tangible to Canadians, that will show progress to Canadians, that show action to Canadians, and that is what our government's committed to doing. As I said before, Canadians know that Canada faces large environmental challenges, but they also know that we can make steps and we can make progress, and that's what this government is committed to doing, and I look forward to working with all of the committee members when Canada's Clean Air Act is tabled to move forward, to make it stronger, and to show Canadians that we can work together to put in place, for the first time, a national framework to deal with their #1 environmental priority, which is air quality, and another issue that they're very concerned about, which is climate change.
You also mentioned in your opening statement about the review of the 23,000 substances, and a lot of work has been put into that, obviously, by good civil servants who've been at this over, as was referenced before, many years. So could you share what you believe in concrete, tangible ways that means for Canada, that completion of that review?
Well, as you know, Canadians are increasingly concerned about the toxic chemicals that are in our environment. A lot of these toxic chemicals are in our household goods and products that we use, and face creams and clothing and in our upholstery. And our government has an obligation to make sure that we're protecting the health of Canadians by working with industry to ensure that they're not using those kinds of cancer-causing toxic substances. The categorization process, as Mr. Dion indicated, is a process that has taken 7 years to come to. On September 14th, Canada became the first country to review 23,000 chemicals, substances that are in use right now. And as I said, our government has already acted on a number of those substances by banning and restricting their use in Canada, but we are also will be releasing very soon a comprehensive public action plan on toxic chemicals to ensure and reassure Canadians that we will be acting to protect their health.
Thank you. Minister, I know that you have to be somewhere at 10:30. We have 3 members, Mr. Cullen, Silva, and Harvey, who have a very brief question. I wonder if you might let them ask their questions and either get back to them or give an answer. Just not 5 minutes, but 1 question each. Would you be able to stretch it that long?
Sure. I've probably got about 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay. Mr. Cullen, if you'd like to begin with your question, please.
Wow, 1 question. I guess I better make it a good one.
You always do.
Oh, thank you. The question I have is twofold. The accountability is an extremely important word and phrase that gets used a lot by you. When your plan comes out for short-term targets, greenhouse gas targets, when are you coming back to committee? And second, is your government plan to take toxics out of CEPA? And why would you want to create a new plan, a new bill, when we have CEPA already in place that can clean up our air? And why would Canadians have to wait 5 more years for their air to get better?
We'll go to Mr. Silva. Okay. If we can just get the 3 questions.
I'll be very brief, Minister. Thank you for coming. Just As the spokesperson for your government on environment, and also as the chair of the UN's Conference of Parties, does your government believe that climate change and global warming is the single most important environmental issue facing our planet? It's a yes or no question.
I think it's the most important environmental...
Could we just get Mr. Harvey, and then we'll do all three at once?
My question is simple. Earlier, you told us that over $100 million has been spent overseas in international credits purchasing. And yet, there has been no return on that, on the type of that money that was spent.
Answers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, accountability is very important to our government, which is why we will be introducing Canada's Clean Air Act, which will bring a framework to making sure that we can actually show progress to Canadians. It's important, you mentioned CEPA, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a very important piece of legislation in Canada, but it could be stronger. It could have, we need enforced powers for reporting, for auditing, to be able to actually show measurable results to Canadians. And that is what you'll see in Canada's Clean Air Act. To respond to Mr. Silva's question, yes, I agree from a global perspective that climate change is without a doubt the environmental issue that has brought the world together. And Canada is there participating on the world stage. But as I said as well, we need a strong domestic framework at home. And the #1 environmental concern of Canadians is air quality. And as I said, it's time that we move forward with a national legislative framework to address both those issues, to address air pollution and address greenhouse gases. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We do have a point of order, but I certainly understand the minister has to go.
No, I have a point of order.
On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you. Certainly, we know you'll be back and answer more questions. Thank you, Mr. Dion.
Point of order, because, Minister, it is in 2008 that Kyoto will not be achievable after one additional year of inaction by your government. That's what I have said. I want that on the record, please.
Mr. Dion.
The meeting is over.
It's over,
you
yes.
called it. Thank you very much. Yeah, you're a leadership candidate. We all
Thank you.